Perfect. So today we're going to be covering a decrease in asset value. So a decrease in asset value is a type of decrease in scope. And in Nakisa, we offer two decrease in scope reason codes. So the first one is decrease in lease term. And then the second one is a decrease in asset value. The difference between these two reason codes is going to be the treatment under US GAAP, which differs between a decrease in lease term and a decrease in asset value. In the July office hours, we did cover the decrease in lease term. So if you would like to review that session, as well as the case scenario that we presented, that can be found on the office hour website. Additionally, we have examples of both decrease in lease term and decrease of asset value in our user guide. Before we get into today's example, I just want to mention that a decrease in scope scenario may require complex judgment, validation, and checks. So we recommend that you perform tests in QA before doing so in prod, and that the accounting team is involved in the judgment behind these procedures. So we are going to go over what is required for a decrease in asset value, and then we're going to do a case scenario in the application. So a decrease in asset value gives you the ability to decrease the carrying amount of the right of use asset and the carrying amount of the lease liability in the same proportion, but in a different absolute value. This is done through a lease modification with the reason code decrease in asset value. An example of when you'd want to use this would be if you, the lessee, and your lessor decide that you're going to decrease the amount of space you're renting. So the example that I have here on the screen is you're leasing 1,000 square meter office space. And during the course of your lease, you, the lessee, and your lessor come to the agreement to reduce the space rented to 500 square meters. In order to perform a decrease in asset value, we will need to perform a lease modification at the contract level using the reason code decrease in asset value. It's important to note that you should unselect the modified contract rate for this reason code. No other modification should be performed at the same time as a decrease in asset value. If you did want to modify the contract rate or do any other type of change in the same period, you need to perform a separate event, but you could use the same effective date. In this lease modification pop-up window, you're going to be asked to enter the ROU asset decrease amount, and this represents the amount by which the right of use asset will be decreased by. In the example that I have on the screen, my contract is classified as a finance lease for IFRS and an operating lease for US GAAP. That is why there are two fields to enter. However, if you only report under one standard, or if your contract was classified as solely finance, you would have just one field to enter. You can apply different methods to determine the amount to decrease the right of use asset by, depending on your internal policies. There's also a description field where you can add a description to this lease modification. This is optional. Once you are satisfied with the information you have entered, you can click submit and a draft will be created. The information we just entered is affecting the asset side. So now we need to go and reduce the liability side proportionately. In order to do that, we must add a reduction term to the terms and conditions at the lease component level. So first, we're going to navigate to the lease component level, and we're going to add our new terms and condition, which will be a reduction term. We want to make sure that our reduction term is proportionately reducing our liability. So in the example that I've been showing, we have a 1,000 square foot office space and we're reducing it to 500 square feet. If our base rent is $1,000 per month, we would want to reduce that by 50%. So we're adding a reduction term of $500 per month. Additionally, our first payment date and our expected terms and conditions start date should be set to when the decrease in asset value is taking place, so when you're doing this modification. Once you're satisfied with your reduction term, you should continue to follow the normal workflow for approval of the contract, the lease component, and the activation group as if this is any other type of modification. It is important to remember that you'll want to exercise that reduction term at the activation group level. You're also going to be asked to select an effective date, a posting date, and a document date in order to send the activation group to assessment. Significant judgment is needed to determine the effective date. So there's a couple of considerations that I've put up here to take into consideration. So the effective date cannot be before the effective date of a previous event. It must be in the month during the lease term, and it must be in a month that does not have any payments, accruals, or asset depreciation already posted. The last 2 points on the screen depend if your payments are in arrears or in advance. So I will let you read those depending on your case scenario. Once everything is approved and your draft has been merged, your contract will return to an active state, and then you can see the modification entries that have been posted. Your application is going to generate 3 adjustment postings, one for liability, one for asset, and one for our gain and loss. So as we can see here for both standards, the application is posting the same adjustment postings, but we have different numbers because under US GAAP, we have an operating lease, and under IFRS, we have a finance lease. Before I jump into the application and do an illustrative example together, we're just going to cover quickly the differences between a decrease in asset value and a payment reduction. So a payment reduction is triggering an adjustment for the same absolute value of both the liability and the asset, where a decrease in asset value, which is what we just covered, is decreasing the carrying amount of the right of use asset and the amount of the lease liability in the same proportion, yet with a different absolute value. Therefore, your decrease in asset value is going to trigger your gain and loss, whereas a payment reduction will not. Decrease in asset value is considered a decrease in scope. I will now jump into the application to do a case scenario with everyone. So I have already created a contract for this example, but together we'll review the terms and conditions just so everyone is aware of what we're working with. So under our terms and conditions, we just have one term and condition. It's a base rent of $1,000 monthly, starting January 1st, 2020, ending December 31st, 2022. So we have a 36-month contract, amount frequency one time, and payment frequency monthly. I am the lessee, and me and my lessor have decided and have agreed upon, as at January 1st, 2021, we're going to reduce the office space I am renting by 50%. So in order to input this into the application, we start up here at the contract level. We go to our contact menu, which is these 3 dots, and we're going to do a lease modification. First step is we're going to need to pick the date. So we are performing this lease modification on January 1st, 2021. And our reason code is going to be our decrease in asset value. Our modified contract rate is required to be unchecked for this reason code. I have already calculated our ROU asset decrease amount for both our finance and operating leases. So I'm just going to grab them from off the screen and enter them in here. For my description, I will enter September office hours decrease in asset value. This field is optional, so it is up to you if you would like to enter any information on the lease modification you're performing. When we click submit, our contract is going to go into draft state. We'll just give it a minute or two. Perfect. So we can tell it's in draft state because it says version draft, and we have this yellow bar at the top. The amounts we entered in our pop-up are what is reducing our asset. So in order to reduce our liability, we're going to need to add our reduction term. So from the Jump To menu, we'll go to our lease component and our terms and conditions. From here, I'm going to add a standard term, and we're going to do a reduction. Since we decided to reduce by 50%, we can see that our original lease amount is $1,000. So we'll now want to reduce it by $500, which is 50%. We're going to select the same amount frequency and payment frequency as the base rent. Our first payment date is going to be the date that we would like this modification to come into effect, which is going to be January 1st, 2021. Our last payment date is going to be the same as the base rent, as this decrease in scope is going to take place for the rest of the lease term. So the end of our term is January 31st, 2022. I will then copy paste those dates down below, and I will click submit. I'm now going to use the Jump To menu to go back to my contract, and I'm going to send to approval. Since I'm in our demo build here, I have access to approve as well. However, in your production, it would be someone else. Once my contract and my lease component are approved, I will navigate down to my activation group, where my first step is going to be to make sure I check likely to exercise on my reduction. Next step, I'm going to send to assessment. And here's when I'm going to need to pick my dates. For my effective date, I'm going to pick January 1st, 2021, as this is the date I want my modification to take place. For my posting date, if you're connected to SAP, you're going to want to pick an open period. And your document date is purely for documentation purposes. There's no financial impact of this date. Once you are happy with the dates you've entered, you can click submit. And our schedules have been generated. So I'm going to review our schedules before we continue. So we'll click our three little dots and we'll click view schedules. First step, I'm going to go to all our years and view all columns. We can now see a green line, which indicates an event has taken place in this period. Here we can see our reduction term that we entered coming into play to reduce the amount that we are paying every month. And if we keep scrolling over to our opening liability, we can see that it has also been reduced. And we will continue over to our delta columns. This is the amount that we entered. We're under IFRS. So this is the amount that we entered as a reduction to our asset. This is our gain and loss. And then we can see the difference, which is going to our liability side. We can also look at our US GAAP schedules. And we will see the same thing. So we'll see the amount that we entered for our asset. And we can also see the decrease in our liability right here. Additionally, we can see our decrease in our payment term as well. Once we are satisfied with our schedules, we can return to our draft activation group and click approve. We'll confirm our classification. And then to finish the lease modification, we're going to return to our contract level. We'll go to our three dots and we're going to click complete assessment. It's going to ask us, all the changes made to the draft will merge to the master version and cannot be reverted. Do we want to continue? So at this step, we can no longer delete our draft or make any changes to our draft. So at this step, I am happy to merge. So I will click confirm. We'll give the application a minute or two.
So while the system is merging the draft into the master version of the contract, do you have any feedback, questions? How do you deal with your decrease in scope scenario? Do you have any particular policies internally? Would be interested to know more,
Yes.
more of that on your end.
Yes, and then now that it is all also activated, I can show you the unit postings for our modification, which we'll see here, our impact to our asset and our impact to our liability, where we're seeing that gain and loss come through. Are there any questions, or as Catalina said, how are you guys managing your decrease in scope at the moment? Okay, if there's no, oh,
I actually have a question or just a comment. So
Yeah.
this is Elena at 3M, and so a couple years back we did one of these, and we were able to write off the whole asset value and leave the liability value. So it was a situation where we walked away from a property, and it takes a couple months, right, for all the legal stuff to happen. But they wanted to show that we did not have any right to that asset at the end of the period. And so we were able to, on here, we were able to write down the total, net book value. Now it only allows you to write down to like the last period's depreciation, and then that is scheduled over the life of the asset, because we've had 3 more instances this year where we had to do that, where we, until the legal can be handled, we still have the legal liability, but we don't have any right to the asset because we've either given the keys back or left the property or those types of things. And so we wanted the asset to be 0, and the liability to still remain until we actually solve that. That makes sense.
Hi, Alana. So what you're describing is a bit of a specific scenario, because we're setting the asset to 0. It's not a decrease. It's in a way equivalent to a full impairment, but that is the need. It is a case scenario, and it's not fully supported to the decrease in asset that we are seeing right now. However, we do have ways to support such a scenario. So if you can reach out to us, we can look into your specific scenario. And I do believe you're reporting under US GAAP only.
Yes. Yeah.
So this is one of the reasons that you were seeing that workaround with the loss depreciation, especially for operating classification. We have a lot of validation in the system to make sure that the net book value doesn't become negative. So that's the reason that the full decrease and the full impairment is not currently supported, but we are supporting it in our next generation, and we have a way to help you with your specific case. So please send us the specific case. We'll help you out.
Hopefully we're done with that, but we'll see. Yeah. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Right. Go ahead, Ailey.
Oh, I was just going to say, if there's no other questions, I'm going to pass it back over to Catalina.
All right. So I hope there are more questions, as we did had a lot of inquiries lately, and I was hoping that we'll have more questions and feedback, but that's okay. We'll have the session out there, and we'll probably continue to discuss on this. One last point to take, as Haley was mentioning, the decrease in scope situation are typically complex scenario, and you can go up to the point as Alana was describing where you need to set the asset to zero. So for those questions, we welcome you to come and discuss with you. It not may be a very straightforward scenario. It might require additional testing, and if I remember from my life within the accounting and finance department, such cases are typically more complex, and we are here to help you. We have enough terms and conditions to support your case scenario, but it's harder to work on a concept or on something that we know or make reference to. It's always easier to work with your specific example and towards the targeted end result. So please let us know your examples, and we can work with that. We'd love to have your feedback. And with that in mind, I'll continue with the next topic that we have prepared for today, and it is about the dates in Nakisa. So let me share my screen